Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down those unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Joining us all the way from Cape Cod, Massachusetts today, my good friend, Geoff Bright. Well, you know what? It's funny. I meet people online and I support so much their success, and you feel like with this online world, especially over social media, you feel like you really get to know people. And I feel like I know you a bit, but we've never actually met in person. But that's a beautiful thing about social media, is like I can follow your journey and certainly support. You can do the same thing back, and you start to feel like you build a bond online, which is something that not too long ago we never had. But anyways, Geoff, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Brandon. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Now you have you work in an interesting area, right? Cape Cod. From what I understand, there's roughly 230,000 people, something like that, in the area that are there probably year round. But for a long time, it was known as a vacation property or a vacation destination for a lot of people. So I would assume probably double the amount of people that live there year round were. This was like their second home, their vacation home. Am I anywhere in the right area of population? Just to get a grasp on what we're talking about.
It sounds like that aligns because Cape wide, that sounds like a pretty accurate assessment as far as population goes. I know that I believe it's 14 towns, I think. In my town, the winter population is like 40,000. And then the summer population is like 130. So, everything like blows up in the warmer months here. So, that sounds correct.
What did you start? You're in the renovation space, building space. You have an immense amount of experience, right? Close to 30 years in the trades. Where did you start in the trades versus what you're doing right now? How did you get involved in construction in general?
It's pretty wild. Like, I was in college and I was 20 years old, and I, realized that this was just not for me. Just wasn't my path. And I just wanted to, move on with my life as a, early 20 something and get a job. So I got a job on a paint crew, and, no experience, no nothing, barely had ever picked up a tool even. And, I realized and learned how, happy I was to be working in construction related work and being outside, the teamwork aspect, and then of course learning what the entrepreneurial part of it can bring you, as I really didn't know at the time. So that's kind of how it went from there. Over some years, I shifted to carpentry, and then I just kept pushing it. And here I am.
I've been pushing trades and home service businesses a lot, right? I feel that there's a massive demand, certainly in our industry. I imagine you're probably feeling the same. A big demand for trades businesses, and for a long time there was a lot of pushback on getting involved in trades and construction. And I'm trying to like push people back in the other direction, right? It's like, if you want to become a plumber, man, like, yes, become a plumber. If you want to be an electrician, yes, become an electrician. But where I grew up, it was a third or fourth or fifth choice, right? Getting involved in the trades was something that you did if you didn't get good grades and you didn't go to university to get a real career. It wasn't something that, mom and dad were ever going to be proud of. And I take that back a little bit. My parents were pretty proud that I got involved in anything, and that I was accepted into any sort of career after my lackluster appearance in high school. But uh, there's a lot of interest in the trades nowadays, because especially in the wake of AI, and there's this belief that a lot of people have that trades are going to be one of the last disrupted, I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Industries. I didn't want to blanket statement the whole like industry, but
Sure.
it really is, for lack of a better term, right? It's going to be one of the last industries that's really going to be penetrated by AI, where jobs are going to start disappearing. And so it becomes a safe option, and therefore an opportunity to build a massive career and make really good money. But there's been a shift, I think, in probably when you started back in 27, 28 years ago on a painting crew, learning versus what people expect to learn when they walk into a company nowadays. I remember when I was on my first crew working commercial construction, I had no idea what I was doing. But the relationship that I had with my manager, with the foreman at the time, was I speak when I'm spoken to. I have my head down. I don't ask too many questions. I definitely don't get in the way.
Right.
And that was sort of the relationship that we had. But what was it like when you first started on that painting crew? Did you have a similar experience, or as you were working your way up through the different trades? What was your early experience like getting involved?
Yeah, that's quite ironic that you frame it like that, because it's very true. When I first joined this team, this is like in '97, and it was a very hierarchical structure, right? Like there was a very highly experienced person. I mean, well, there's the company owner, and then there was the foreman who, who was there every day, was diligent, and the crew had standards, and it was actually a rewarding experience in that way. And it was sort of what I would expect, mostly because, I'm the one of all the group that, doesn't know and have any experience and wants to learn. And the one part that was refreshing about it when I think back compared to now is that I was taught, like I was well taught, and not just by my employer, but the more senior members of the team. So I feel like that experience, especially compared to how things are today, when I see new people coming into the trades, it's almost like there's a lot of people that are just coming into the trades and then just sort of winging it. Like they're not
Mhm.
even getting good, instruction and good experience from the right type of employer. So,
Why do you think that is?
it's tough to say. I think that the it's sort of like I want to frame it like 30 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever, we weren't necessarily in what I would call like a gig economy. And I feel like we kind of are now. I think the immigration boom that came from the 90s and back in that era was really kind of strictly labor,
Mm.
right? So a lot of folks, like, they come in, they're very well, they do very well in the self applicability department, and they're hard workers, so they go after it. um, Probably, and not just immigrants, just anybody, go after the self employment path before they actually learn something or learn enough, maybe. But I think that overall, the understanding that it's a little bit easier with the internet, with social media, with the digital economy, to launch a business and start a business.
It's
So I think,
never been easier. Yeah.
yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. There's really actually a lot of factors. So, and while I'm no professional in that department, that's sort of my take on it, right? I mean, we're so much more connected now than we were 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, especially with the advent of social media, as we both know. So I think it's some pretty wild changes growing up in the 80s and 90s. Like you spoke to it about going to college. I was raised to go to college. I played sports in college, and I took a completely different completely different route with my profession. So but I was blessed in the sense that I started with a team that was actually willing to teach me, and I was interested in learning. So I got good at a thing and was able to take it on the road.
Interested in learning, right? That's a huge component because I think actually my experience, I don't want to say I think, I want to say my experience with bringing on apprentices is there's been this expectation that they are going to come on, and if they have experience in any sort of area, they walk around with honestly a bit of a sense of confidence, or a lot of them have a sense of confidence that I never had walking onto a job site for whatever reason. I don't know if they feel that they're going to perform better than they are, or if it's an entitlement thing. I'm not too sure, and I don't want to blanket statement everybody, but I've certainly had this experience where we have apprentices that walk onto the job site. Maybe they have 6 months experience or 8 months experience, and they have this underlying confidence that they can really do anything on the job site. But as you know, it's very, very complex. And I don't know where that comes from, but I have found that certainly as a bit of a common thread through a lot of the apprentices that we've had come on over the last couple of years. I don't know where that comes from, but I was in these early stages in construction. I had very little confidence when I walked onto the first job site ever. I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I say I fell into construction by accident, and truly I did. It was something that I was interested in, but I didn't have a path to get into construction. And I ended up meeting a gentleman that was a recruiter for a construction company. And I happened to be helping my mom move places at that time, and he had said, we need some good young guys to be laborers and come down and start working construction and get involved. Do you want to come down for an interview? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm into that. So I went down for this interview, and I walked in. I didn't even meet him, the guy that I was going to be meeting. I just met this woman at the front counter, and she said, okay, here's your paperwork. Sign here. This is how much you're going to make, and this is when you're going to be on site. So there wasn't even an interview. It was just I was
Right.
going down to sign employment papers, and next thing I know, without even asking any questions, I ended up on a job site a week later at 6:30. I didn't even know. I think I showed up wearing a pair of cowboy boots at that point because I didn't even know. Like, I didn't
Nice.
own a pair of steel toe boots. That's just what I thought, like, in my mind, was the right thing. But it was very overwhelming, and I had very little confidence walking onto a job site because I didn't know anything about it. And I believe now that there's people have an understanding of how things should be when they get into a trade, but I don't know that employers have an understanding. A lot of employers have an understanding of what it is that they need to provide to satisfy the
Agreed.
needs of a newer generation, right? There's this
Agree. Yeah.
expectation that there's going to be an extraordinary onboarding process. There's an expectation that there's going to be, a team lunch, and that it's going to be, rah, rah, rah throughout the week, and trying to create this level of trying to meet the expectations of a newer and what I find a more demanding workforce coming into construction is a difficult thing for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, especially if they've been in the trades for a long period of time. And that's some of the feedback that I get from a lot of business owners. And when they approach me and they say, we're having a really difficult time with staff retention, and all these young guys, they don't have any desire to learn. They don't, and I don't believe that that's the case. I just think that the expectations have fundamentally changed as far as what it means to be employed and what it means to work for a company, whether it's trades or not. But certainly there's a shift in the generations after us that are now working themselves into a trade and want to get involved.
Yeah, I can relate to this quite a bit. And when I in discussions like with some of my subcontractors, the recurring theme all the time is, when I see new faces, right? And or they had a member of their team that was seemingly really coming along and succeeding is no longer there. And a lot of times what I see is that they're like, well, we train them and then they leave. And my thought at first was, I've seen this when I was at spec trade level. This is going back like 15, 17 years. And what I now learned though later, right, was that it's not that, you know, it's not that it's not that you train them and then they left. It's that you stopped training them. You knew how to train them how to do a thing, but you didn't know how to train them to welcome them into the next level of your organization, right? Like if you want them to be a manager and you want to be able to rely on somebody, right? You have to train them for that position. That's not the same thing as just being a skilled person. And I see a lot of that where people are like, "Well, he left." I'm like, "Well, you let him," right? So we as employers, we do have a job to do, right, in that way. So I see a lot
What
of
was
that.
what was the biggest shift when you moved from working as a skilled person into self-employment?
Well, I think the one thing that I noticed was I was able to deal with the physical aptitude of the work. It really doesn't matter. It never really mattered what the trade was, right? And I was always great at talking with people. So right off the top, I knew within a few years, I was like, I could make a business out of this. I mean, I'm once like you were speaking to it some moments ago, right, where you have little confidence in the early goings, but when you become good at something, your confidence is much higher, right? So you're able to sell something, and I think the biggest thing that I learned is that when I went off on my own, right? At least for certain project scopes, it was I don't want to use the word easy, but it was rudimentary. It was the same thing as I was doing before, except I got to have a relationship with the client, right? Whereas instead of just taking direction from a team or a foreman or whatever from some other company, um, and the biggest shift that I noticed about me is that it gave me confidence to follow that like as a permanent path. I had certain visions of how I would want it to be, although at the same time wasn't exactly sure. It can be a complex journey in construction, especially when you shift out of one trade to another for certain metrics or what you think the outlook may be, or what niche you want to fall in, whether it's residential or commercial, and these things. But overall, I think it was the personability part of it that the market demanded out of tradespeople. There was a lot of people out there that are really good, and just, you know, I recognize that there were not that many great people that were good at, following through as a quality service, something a customer can count on and stuff like that. So I think that was the biggest thing for me, that it was a rewarding feeling that, you know, I was able to do it in that way, and take it from just, being a tradesperson on a team somewhere.
I mean, you nailed a lot of that right there. And I think a lot of the struggles that people have when they go through this transition, and they're really skilled at something, right? They decide I'm a great excavation contractor, I'm a great electrician, I'm a great plumber, I'm a great carpenter, and suddenly they've decided I can do this better myself. I can go and I can build something and create something myself, more so than the opportunities that are in front of me that my employer can create. So first of all, I would say to that employer, they haven't created a vision or the ability to really scale up that the employee or the tradesperson that you were referring to when you were previously talking about why people are leaving. And I look at that as they don't have a process to help scale them up, right? You can't continue to train them. They feel like they've been tapped out at what they can learn. feel that they're going to be tapped out at maybe the salary that they can achieve, and they have bigger hopes and dreams for their lives. And as soon as you stop being able to create that, then they should go. Real quick before we get back to the show, if you have heard anything on this podcast that has resonated with you, or if it's helped you in any way, appreciate more than anything in the world if you could go hit that subscribe button or leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. I want to go back to being able to continue to serve and do more and more and help out and get bigger and bigger guests on, better and better. The only way that I can do that is with your help. I'm so honored to be here. Let's get back to the show. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. And chase after their dreams and go and do their own thing. But I believe that anybody can be an entrepreneur, but not everybody should. And one of the biggest struggles is
absolutely
that I hear is they're really good at what they do, but then they get into business for themselves and they don't know how to charge. They're terrible communicators. They're really good at the one thing that they're good at. But as far as invoicing is always terrible, as far as collecting change orders, whether it's going to be updating administrative work, like so many trades did not get into business for themselves to sit behind a computer and work through spreadsheets and dial in a CRM system and build out the back end of that. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in a position doing all the things that they hated doing. And they spent all this time building a career around so that they didn't have to do the thing. But now they're doing the thing, and they spend less time doing the thing that they're actually good at, that's been making them money all along. And it becomes this vicious cycle. And then they themselves end up hitting this barrier that drives them absolutely nuts, because now they're not only that skilled person on the tools, but they're also the one that is writing the operating procedures. They're doing the invoicing at night, or they're trying to build a communication plan. They're trying to do sales. They're trying to do some level of marketing if they're lucky. But all of these things that they never got trained in when they said, you know what, I went to electrical school. I got my certification in electrical, but nobody taught me what it was going to look like if I was to go and start my own electrical company.
Yeah, that is a long road, right? Because you touched on it. Right on it, right? You learn a trade, like I was talking about dealing with people, being a people person, right? And from there, it's just sort of, hey, document a price, document an agreement structure, and for small scale stuff, when you're working as a standalone, a solopreneur or whatever, you can kind of run that gauntlet for quite some time if you're willing to put yourself through that. And I don't say that in a negative way. It's just, how it is. It's physically demanding, and there's a reason why we move on the way we move on, right? It's not just long-term financial, and it's a player's game, as I like to call it. So I think that part of it, and I think that's like I took a lot of it. Not at the level that we're talking about. Like elite coaching is a perfect example. Like at a level where you get to a certain point, like you have to learn a whole new slate of how to successfully run a business. It was absolutely, you really can't put a price on how valuable it is, right? When you learn like that from people that are 10 stages above you. And I think that for tradespeople in construction, like it's not there. Right. It isn't really there, or it is, and they just haven't even been exposed to it, or it hasn't been introduced to them, or however you want to describe it. And I think that, it's a huge roadblock when it comes to seeing quality outfits or quality people scaling a business, when it just lacks some education and some insight, or even a mentorship, or a little of all of those things. And I think that it's critically important that as people that want to scale a business beyond the craft that they're good at, they're searching this out. Like they're searching out these channels. People like yourself, right? People that are pushing the elevator button back down, right? Sending it back down to people that can get great value from it. And I take that train all day, every day, to help people, even, curb people away from making the mistakes that I've made, right? I'm sure I could have condensed where I've gotten to in a number of years by not making the mistakes I've made. So And I think that people just kind of run out of steam, you know, like we were talking about not allowing people to grow within their organization, right? They don't want to train them to be a supervisor, or they're afraid to commit that bigger level of pay that that person wants, because that's what a tradesman does, right? When they, before they move to working for themselves, they're basically comparing dollars. Like, where am I going to get better money? I feel like I know I can definitely get better money without knowing, except if I don't have 12 months out of the year scheduled to do their work. They can be more successful that way. So I think there's a lot missing for especially spec trade guys that are, like you said, just coming off the tools, or trying to come off the tools and maintain a couple of quality personnel people. Um, there's a lot of insight out there that I don't even think they're really looking for.
I used to work with, I mean, I've been back in my commercial construction days when it's been so long since I've actually been employed. I don't know that I could be employed at this point. I'd be a terrible employee, but the,
Like, same.
I remember having conversations with these guys, especially as I was going through my apprenticeship, and I was working for a company, and they were bouncing around a lot to different companies, right? They started with the company that I was working with, and they had, pretty quickly, that's where I got to know them. But then this company was paying $1 more an hour, or $2 more an hour over here. And they started jumping around to different crews, right? Chasing a few extra dollars. And at the time I was a little envious of that, because I thought, all right, they're going to go and make more money. This is going to be more opportunity. But I stayed with the company that I ended up staying with, and I really don't regret that at all. And I'll tell you why. The reason I don't regret that was because of the experience that I was able to get. Although it didn't pay me as much as it would have if I had jumped around to another company, or jumped from, where I was to a union position over here, and then a non-union position over there, and, whatever. But what it got me was depth. What it got me was closer to the people that ran the business. It got me closer to the people, the positions that I wanted to be in. It started to build trust. I became a familiar face within the organization, and very quickly started moving up the ranks, and was given more and more responsibility, and therefore more and more pay. And the guys that started jumping around chasing, the odd dollar here and dollar more an hour there, are still doing that to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't ever find, I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of them still haven't found what I would call traction in their career, because they still have that same mindset. Whereas if you're sticking with an organization for a longer period of time, as long as they can, down the road, they can provide you that opportunity, it is, and they want to have you, and they encourage growth within their organization, then there just becomes a depth there, and that you can't get if you're jumping around from company to company to company, from a new crew to a new crew to a new crew. And I believe it was because I stayed that I was given the amount of opportunity that I was given, and it was because of that continued to build confidence. So when I went to start my own company, I had this fundamental experience of how this company was run, and I was able to connect with a lot of people along the way, to ask questions, to figure stuff out. And I felt like I had a much stronger landing pad when I went to go in
Absolutely.
and work for myself.
Absolutely. And what you said is so true. Like, the longer you're with a company, the more you learn about the process, right? You're not just learning like a craft or technical knowledge. You're learning about the organizational aspect of it. And you learn so much from that experience on how to move to your own, if you if you eventually go that way. Like, one of the things I've, like, my company now, Synergy, I've has been active now for we're just about to reach 15 years. And I've had a very, very, very low turnover rate for my main core people. I've hired some people, I've fired some people, but I have a number of people that have worked for several years. One individual right now who's been working for 8 years, who basically really kind of, I don't want to call it nothing because no job is no money, but he's more than doubled his income and is making a six-figure salary now after 8 years. And I will say, and I'm sure you can relate to this, like when you hire, right, in your company or your companies, if you're hiring, internal people, there's a certain amount of faith. Like you have to choose well, and you have to have a certain amount of faith that they're actually going to stand by, because you know what it's like to be in their position, but they don't know your position, at least not yet. And until they try it themselves, they probably won't. Um, so there's a certain level of faith there, but selected wisely, like this individual was, right? He's made a good life, out of, basically following the same kind of path that you were just describing, right? Staying in one place, learning what you're doing, repetition, like putting in the reps, getting better, but also learning like the process of things. And now, like, there's like a couple of days out of the week where he gets to spend a couple of days, or, at least a few hours of each day doing, management related things like recording and reporting related things. And he's not like killing himself 10 hours a day like the other guys are that are jumping around like you were describing. So there's that aspect too. So it's, there, when it comes to having key figures in your company in construction, it's like a double-edged sword there. Like each person has to have faith and each person has to make sacrifices. But that framework there in the end wins. That's how you build a strong team.
One of the things I'd like to mention is every industry is going to be different, right? In the trades, there's so many different types of companies, right? Maybe you're a service-based company, you're doing HVAC. Maybe it's going to be a painting contractor where you are painting, the odd home that might take you a week, right? And then you're kind of moving on to the next project. But there's this lower average job size sort of segment, and then there's the larger average job size segment, which would be, larger scale renovations, new home construction, versus a specialty trade that might be, installing flooring for a day. And it becomes more important when you have these larger average job sizes, when you're in that renovation world, when you're in the home building world, to have good people, because the projects that you're going to be working on are over a long time horizon, right? You might have a project manager that's working with a customer and a design team for a year in design, or 2 years in architecture and permitting, and then another year to build the thing. So that's a 3-year commitment where that relationship is being built. And if you start injecting new faces into that process the whole time, is going to kill the confidence between your customers and your company. Is going to kill the movement, because you constantly have to get people up to speed on the project that's going forward. Balls are going to get dropped because renovations and home building are very, very complex. So if you bring somebody into a midway through a renovation, it's very difficult to onboard them and into a new process so that they can take over and start managing that. So when we have these larger average job size businesses, I feel that it's even more important that we have a solid team, and you're able to build out that core foundational team of people that you can rely on, that love what they're doing, that are aligned with the mission, that are going to take care of your customers and represent your business in the best way.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely 100% correct on that. And one thing, I'm sure you've seen this in your experience, right? If you've had people that have been on your team, you spoke to that specific thing there about familiarity, the client like feeling good about, who's there, or when you come back to do another service for a customer and they're like, oh, wow, Vinny's still working for you, huh? And it's like, oh yeah, so they're like, that's great, and it really helps. And I think that, I think it's a huge plus when, there's an overall commitment, right? And I think that part of when I say, well, you let them go, where the company owner failed to train the person at a higher level, wasn't even necessarily because they couldn't. There was like some, and I've been there, right? There's just some growth aspects to it. And some of it does ride on faith, but yeah, I think that that's an important piece of it, and you got it exactly right.
We go through a fairly structured and rigorous interview process, and that I have found has been exponentially helpful. And one of the things that when it comes to hiring people, trades owners are particularly bad at are following a process when it comes for hiring. They need somebody that has a heartbeat and a hammer, and they need somebody now, right? They've signed a few projects, or they start scrambling all of a sudden to get somebody in. Like, we need somebody now, we need somebody now. And so the first person that walks through the door that they sit down at a local Starbucks coffee shop with to start interviewing, they start picturing themselves. This person's coming in. Hey, he or she, they look kind of clean cut. They're saying some of the right things. Okay, let's go. That sounds good. You're the new person. You're coming on. But they overlook a lot of red flags because they haven't built out a process to follow to eliminate those red flags, and they really discredit the hiring process, and it comes in to become really harmful down the road because they're now spending 3 months training the person, and then they're saying, okay, go and spend another 6 months on this trial project. And just to find out that, all right, I made a big mistake, but already that ship is in motion. It's pretty difficult to remove them. And if they had taken just this little bit of extra time, followed a process that can really start to eliminate a lot of these red flags so that they can know for certain that they're going to hire them on, knowing what their flaws are going to be, knowing where their strengths are going to be, knowing where it is that they're going to need to really focus on to learn. At least when you're making that hire, you understand what you're going to be getting. But so many people overlook that step, that very simple step, because it's kind of a tedious process. And interviewing people is not a lot of fun when you're asking them about their challenges and like the most difficult thing that they've ever been through and how they've handled that in their life, and give me some examples. But I have learned after interviewing hundreds of people that the ones that make it through, that the ones that stick around are the ones that took the time to interview properly and really had a strong understanding of who was coming on the team. And it's so important because not only are they coming onto the team to help you out, to help fulfill a task or a set of projects, but they're coming on and they will likely help shape the culture that you're trying to build. They're going to be representing your company brand and the rest of the team in the community. If you're working in a smaller community, they're going to be representative of your brand and your brand promise to your customers. And so it becomes so important to have great people on your team that are aligned and have the company's best interests in mind. And if they can deliver and stay aligned, you as a business owner should be able to create a vision that's compelling enough and a plan that is going to be big enough so that they can then continue to create everything that they want, be as creative as they want, learn the skills that they need to, learn the discipline tactics that they need to, the leadership skills that they need to grow within the organization, or be so confident that if they do decide to leave, you're going to be absolutely thrilled with that because you know that the industry is going to be getting some great people and there's going to be some great faces because you know that they have worked with your team, they have been shaped with the team, and they're going to go out there and create something absolutely awesome in the industry.
Yeah, I can't agree with that any more than absolutely 100%. Like, you're absolutely correct with that. You mentioned, a rigorous interview process, right? Like, mine is the typical, 3-tier, like email, then a phone call, then an in-person. And a lot of it on the front end is like, the technical criteria. Tell me what you know, where you've been, maybe some references. Well, now it is definitely references. Um, but by the time it gets to the in-person part of it, the whole discussion is about character. The whole discussion is about like what we do, what's expected of them as far as, our operational standards, the people aspect of it. Now, granted, like certain things, are sort of obvious, right? But, when you look at somebody who's a position that, you know, could be 3 to 6 months, or if they're a younger person, or maybe it's a seasonal thing, but if you're looking at somebody who's going to be a long-term fixture, right, that has industry experience, that conversation transcends the whole like technicality aspect of the role. To me, at least, that it was worked for me. I think that, that type of framework for hiring somebody that you hope to have long term that's going to fill a key role is understanding, yes, company standards, like, yes, how you do things, but having a core humane understanding of how to live, right? Like, you want to know, like, what their living situations are like what their life experiences are like, and also like what their future is going to be like, or what they hope it to be like, so that you can build something, as you spoke to some moments ago. So I think that, in the process of doing that, it's tremendously important to make sure that when you're in that interview process, or, talking to a potential team member, that they understand that from your perspective, and you're not just there mining them on a character exam, right? It sort of backs up what you want them. It sort of supports the written things or the visual things that you have that offers the opportunity to them. And I think that's important, to generate long-term quality people in our industry, because, as you said earlier, as I've seen in my experience, people join a company and then those aspects of leadership aren't there, and they just kind of become this lifelong, crapshoot basically of a tradesman, and they don't even realize their full potential.
What's one thing that you wish your customers would understand? Your potential customers. Maybe they're not customers yet. Maybe they're homeowners, but
Just one thing.
Your potential clients. Let's start with one thing. But if there was an overarching theme of what you wish people in your market would pay more attention to, specifically your customers. I don't know if it's going to be that culture matters. I don't know if it's going to be a construction process that you wish that they understood and put more value on. I don't know what that is exactly on your end, but I'd be curious to know what it might be that you wish your market knew and understood about what it is that you do.
I think I could say this for a couple different levels of the game. At the level that I'm at now, like in this 7-figure territory, everything and anything that's 500,000 to $1 million or beyond that on a single standalone project, like a custom home or something like that, albeit small custom home, but in that sort of price range and beyond, there's absolutely positively a process, right? I think that when you look in totality, the way the consumer and the market at large views the trades and construction industry, they sort of relate, the guy that just installed 24 feet of fence and managing that aspect and that service are being provided, is the same as managing somebody who's, tearing your house down and building you a new one. And those two processes are not the same. One is very, very involved. It's multi-layer. It's a 5-tool position as a builder at a minimum to even run that. let alone the people that are involved that need to be trusted beyond this point of sale, right? Like, I have three internal people that are in project management, design, administration, that, these are all points of contact. And, by the people that we follow, in Dan's Elite, right? Like it's, hey, it's not just me you're talking to.
This episode is sponsored by New Vision Projects, and everybody has heard the horror stories that happen. They have a friend of a friend or a neighbor that's been renovating for years on end, or they've been building a home and it just hasn't gone the way that it needed to go. Budgets are blown through the roof, timelines, forget about them. New Vision Projects has an incredibly strong track record for over 15 years of working with customers, serving them at the highest level. If you are considering building or renovating, check them out on Instagram at New Vision Projects or at newvisionprojects.com. Building the homes you want with the confidence you need. New Vision has you covered. Let them show you why they're different. Back to the show.
It's an entire company. And I think that when you have like a contract, for example, like a written agreement, and it's a big deal, this thing that you're talking about, right? And it's not just how much does it cost and when will you be done, right? Like there's a whole bunch of other print in that document, and it's not just fluff. We don't just put it there to make the page, to make the page count higher. So I think that one of the things is definitely the process. Like, and if you have a written process for your team, for example, right? You have checklists, workflows, you have employee playbooks, right? You have, subcontractor documents out the wazoo. You expect it to be followed. And if it isn't to any sort of degree, like sooner or later, you're going to run into a problem. And I think that the interjection of this is not every consumer, mind you, right? This is only some, but understanding like what the process is in totality, and it's more than just a financial exchange. Like it's an entire process, like you said. I mean, we've had jobs that have stretched beyond 12 months, right? Some of these, especially custom projects, that like there's a design aspect and a permitting and regulatory aspect to it. So there's like all these things, and getting too muddied in the process of things without directly with a company owner, and not enough with the team as a whole, I think is, that's one thing I think that I'd prefer that the consumer and the market as a whole understood better and acted around better.
It's a good point, and I don't know that they ever will, to be honest. And I
kind of agree with that.
And I only say this because that type of stuff, right? It's valuable for the business owner to understand. It's valuable to know for the business owner that fundamentally you will run a better business if you have better processes and procedures internally. You're going to be able to service the client better. But if the customer is really looking at a key couple things, one is probably going to be the character and trust factor of, do they believe that you are the person that can get the outcome that they are looking for? And it comes with a price. Are they going to be comfortable with that? And is there a timeline involved that they believe is also going to be reasonable? And those are the three things that they really care about. I believe that communication and experience and process throughout the build is something that people say is going to be important. But I know, other builders that have zero of those processes, and they still have happy customers at the end of the project. And I know other builders that have an immense amount of processes, and their customers are happy at the end of the project. The difference being is one business owner is only going to ever be able to produce a certain amount of work, and that's it. And they're limiting themselves to being able to take on more, to generate more revenue, to service more people in the market. And the other business over on the other side that does have all the processes and procedures in place and puts a lot of emphasis on building out the back end of the company is going to be able to service a larger market. And I believe wholeheartedly that if you have a product or you have a service and you are not able to deliver that to as many people as possible. You're not actively working to deliver that service to as many people as possible in a way that they are going to consume it and enjoy the process and certainly benefit from the outcome and have a great experience, then you're doing the market a disservice, because they're going to go out and they're going to hire your competitors that are going to give them an inferior product or an inferior service, because you haven't done the work to grow to be able to, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the word that I'm looking for is to really support that market demand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you have conviction that the Apple computer, for example, is the best product and it's going to solve your problems, if you have a pill that is going to cure cancer, you're going to scream from the rooftops with conviction that you
Right.
should have this Apple computer or you should take this pill because it is going to solve that problem. And if you really do have the best product and you really do have the best service, then you need to grow in a way that more people can see that more people can benefit from what it is that you offer. Otherwise, like I said, they're going to go to your competition and they're going to have an inferior product and inferior service, and they're never going to be able to experience the opportunity that that you can deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that take completely. My thing is mostly like, and this is based on the compartment of communication, right? Like keep your customers close. That's something I am always willing to do, is communicate directly, even, right? I mean, especially in 2026, it's inexcusable to not to be able to do that. The processes part is sort of like how you can get, at least I've seen this in my own experience, like you can actually get stalled out because instead of getting an email in the group thread, I'm getting a text message, at 9:15. Which is it's okay. It's just do the other thing too. And that's part of what I mean, right? Like I always like to share the level of professionalism of the people that are in my team. And these, like Brian and Jennifer, like these people are seasoned industry pros with, engineering degrees and long-standing design expertise. Like they can each do their job better than I can do it. Right. So like I'm over here like, hey, I really want you to have not just, a great relationship with me. I want you to have a great relationship with them too. So that's part of what I mean also, right? Like, obviously not like, sub trades and everybody, that certainly wouldn't work, at least not in most cases. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an important part. And the more that is on display to me, right, at least in my experience and what I hope to achieve, and I like to think that anybody would think the same, is the better service you can provide people if your group is involved in the effort and not just a point of sale contact and only that throughout the whole thing. I've had some experiences where people just get stuck on that. I don't know if you've had ever, on your way up or, even in recent times, like have had clients say they don't like email. They just like to text message, or they just like phone calls, or they hand you printed documents when you meet them every 2 weeks. I've seen all these different ways, and it's like it's not a toolbox, but it's sort of like a buffet of choices, like of this the type of individual that you come across that you do projects with, especially on several months and a year. It's something that you get these different experiences of completely different types of people, make it work. But yeah, it would be great. And now I was offering that in my perfect world scenario where, everybody wanted to communicate with my entire team and respect overall agreements, as well as just, as well as just directly to me. But
Well, you're going to find that some people have more technical experience than others. But I have actually sitting on my desk over here, I have a handwritten testimonial from a client that came into the office and dropped it off.
really,
It's pretty cool. Yeah. Because
that is cool.
I had reached out and I said, hey, we had completed the project and I wanted to get a review for Google. And he said, he came into the office and he stopped in and he said, sorry, like I can't figure out Google how to leave your review. But here's a written piece of paper of all the like great things that you said. And so for me, it was very heartwarming. But at the same time, I was like, I can't do anything with this. The market's never going to see it. It's very cool. It's here on my desk and I look at it as a reminder, but it was, and you have to meet people where they are. So we have a communication plan. And for those, like for anybody that's listening, if you go onto Instagram and just DM me communication, I'll send over our communication plan. But what that is it highlights the cadence in which we follow process throughout communicating throughout a project. So how we deal with internal meetings, when clients are going to be asked to be involved in certain meetings. Is it going to be weekly meetings? Is it going to be, certain meetings at different milestones and what that looks like, as well as a list of, engineers, designers, architects, whoever's going to be on the project. But it talks about the different vehicles of communication. In the early stages of working with customers, one thing that we want to understand is what is their preference for communication? Because we understand our preference for communication.
Right.
Our preference for communication is that everything goes through our project management system, and that is what we like to do. And then when it comes to weekly meetings with clients, we meet with them in person, and then we document all of the notes from the meeting, and then we upload it to our project management system. It's become a lot easier with being able to transcribe and AI rather than going back and point form everything. But still, the process hasn't changed. Even at that, there's going to be so many people that if you build out a budget or build out a schedule in your project management system, they're still not going to look at that. And that's one thing that builders and business owners need to understand is just because you have a desired way of communicating does not mean that that is going to be the desired way of your customer to communicate with you. So still, even at that, we need to provide project status reports, right? Where they're going to be able to either go onto our project management system and look at all of this information themselves, dissect the schedule, take a look at the budget. All the information is there. But a lot of them just want to see what are the nuts and bolts of what it is that we're doing. What happened last week? What's happening this week? Where are we at with budget? Where are we at with schedule? What decisions do I need to make that are on me to help this process move forward faster? And between all of these different points of communication, you end up with an excellent product and at the end of the day, as well as a very happy customer. But you can't do that if you're so bullish in this is the only way that we communicate. This is the only way that we do things. As much as you want to be the way because it is the easiest within your business, there is still a way that other people and the customer prefer to communicate. And you as a business owner have to decide what you're going to tolerate, what is going to work, and then what you can make work to make that experience their own experience while still delivering everything that it is that you promise.
Sure. I mean, it's all about making them comfortable with the process, right? And that's absolutely true. And the reason I like at least my internal team being involved in communication is because I like to be able to invest time in having the type of conversation with the client, and getting their thoughts on things, how they feel about the process, like, talking about certain ideas and what they may like to do with something that is related to a piece of their property that's not in our project scope, or, talking about other things, right? Whereas if your team is sort of not available to them or they're not, in preference of talking like for certain reasons to members of your organization, for whatever the reason may be, it's that much more of a workload as far as the communication part. And I guess it sort of depends on, volume control too. Like, again, spoke to this earlier a little while ago about, being able to serve as many people as you can, without overdoing it. And I think that's another part of it too, as business owners, at the CEO level, there's only one thing that we can do that nobody else can do. Well, there's more than one thing, but there's one critical thing that only we can do, that people on your team, at least at the current status of my team, is I have to look beyond, the next half year. I have to look into next year. I have to do that work. So I think, that's part of like the communication that I like to have with the client. It's not just what we're currently doing, but what looks, into the future, So there's a few different aspects of that, but you're absolutely true. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's true that we have to make sure that, we're meeting them at the middle or better when it comes to their preference in communication. I don't, no argument there.
Absolutely. Geoff, man, where can people find you if they want to connect?
Oh, I can be found on Instagram at Synergy Live or at Geoff Bright _ on LinkedIn at Synergy Homes, and Facebook, Geoff Bright.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure that we link that up in the show notes. Before we sign off here today, are there any last messages that you would love to leave with our listeners? Any thoughts of wisdom that you'd love to leave with customers? Any sort of feedback that you would love to leave with the industry to consider and think about?
Sure. I would say from the clientele and, business relationship side, build a relationship with the people that you're going to do a deal with, a project with. Spend the extra time instead of floating just on what the cheapest price is or how quickly somebody can do a thing. Develop a relationship with the people that you do business with, whatever it may be, whatever industry it is. It really doesn't matter. From the other aspect and the other side of the table, in our industry, as we spoke to early on in the podcast, is, for anybody who wants to succeed in the trades, that didn't expect to enter the trades or didn't plan to enter the trades, don't hesitate to be unrealistic about what you can achieve in the trades. Like, if you have a vision, if you have a path, follow it. I had one when I was 22 years old, and it's exactly, a little bit different, but pretty much exactly what I'm doing right now. And it was because I could see it. So if that's you, if you're watching this and you can see a vision of where you had gone from a regular job to a multi-million-dollar business, then stay on that path and do it. Dive in. Take
Love
it.
That. Head first. My
Absolutely.
man, Geoff, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely, Brandon. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right. And to all the listeners that are out there and still with us, as always, I'm here rooting for you to win. And until next time, stay blessed. Rock and roll.
All right.
Peace.